Hey there, welcome to episode 62 of the FFS Talk audio program. My name is Dan Hugo. I'm your host, of course, solo as usual. Although, man, there's so many good topics that would be a good conversation, I think. But episode 62, recording on Thursday, January 30th, 2025. It's about 4:45 on this fine Thursday afternoon, almost evening. Today we're going to speak another sort of interim episode in the Crowd Wisdom mini-series, part one of about 3 weeks ago now, I think. Part two coming after a couple of slots get filled in the middle. They're all kind of interrelated, but I wanted to make more of a conclusion for part two. So today it's teams and factions. We'll see what comes of it. FFS Talk is ideally a conversational audio program about what works, what doesn't, and what we might do about it. I don't know if I have a real what we might do about it for teams and factions. That's a deep thing, but we'll see what happens. The topic varies, of course, week by week. The overarching goal, though, is to try not to rant about things, but it's easy to get into that mode if you're a one-person essayist, but ideally a conversation or discussion about what works and what doesn't from different viewpoints, and then what we might all kind of collectively arrive at is what we might do about that. And the teams and faction notion kind of highlights what happens when one side is sort of marketing a perception to that same side. So the conversations tend to be amplifying, and whether they're right or wrong, whatever right or wrong even means, and so on. So FFS Talk, the audio program, ideally meant for guests to continue conversations. So all of the episodes, episode 62 today and all of them before, are essentially seeds that have been planted for conversations, discussions, deliberations, who knows, maybe even some potential solutions. And if you don't know what FFS Talk, if you don't know what the FFS means, you need to hang out with more Irish people. On that note, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. The show notes will contain the summary, which I will read, and the links for today's episode, the 2 shameless self-promotion links, of course, and 2 episode links. So let's get on with it, shall we? The summary of today's episode: sports enthusiasm is not a new thing and not unique to the U.S., but it is certainly a driver for much more than sports in recent and not so recent times. We do tend to gravitate toward like-minded individuals, to groups, and eventually to factions that can, not then. I always like finding my typos live while I'm recording. Not live, I guess. And eventually to factions that can be a bit more energized than even their most ardent team supporters otherwise. Where does that lead? So in other words, the people in factions are like subgroups that are particularly energized or motivated. If you think in terms of politics, they're the far or extreme or wing, right wing, left wing, far right, far left, extremists, and so on. So factions are sort of more energized subgroups within a particular group. And I'm likening factions in that context to factions in fandom. Some people just like a good game. Other people go nuts and maybe too far occasionally. So where does this lead? The links for today's episode, the shameless self-promotion at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. That's my profile page, which contains links to my various audio programs and various projects, a little background information. You don't have to spend money at that website or the kofi.com/DanHugo site, the next shameless self-promotion link. I will point out that the places feature places. That's not what it's called. Posts. What did I think I've been saying places. At the top of the profile page, you can see, I think it's posts. I think I said places yesterday or something. Anyway, there are audio posts there. I've been publishing the Buy Me an Update micro episodes there. I talk about previous week and upcoming. I publish it on Monday mornings exclusively on Buy Me a Coffee, also free. But it is an opportunity to cut across all of my undertakings with a quick rundown. I keep it under 5 minutes, believe it or not. Posts. I don't know. I think I've been saying places recently. I must be going nuts. There's a link at the top, though, of the profile page that will take you there, or you can scroll all the way to the bottom of the profile page at buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, and you will find, in reverse chronological order, Buy Me an Update episodes, and maybe some other stuff here and there. Fandom engagement. That's you. Ko-fi.com/DanHugo. They do not allow for direct audio posting and distribution, as Buy Me a Coffee does. So I post textual updates there. These are both platforms used by content creators, open source developers, and so on to engage their users, their listeners, their audience, their fans, whatever you'd like to call yourself. Next up, the groupthink page on Wikipedia. Groupthink is when a bunch of people get together and basically convince each other that they're all correct, whatever they're thinking. If you've ever seen it in action, it can be comical or it can be troubling, to say the least. I will give you one example if you're not familiar with groupthink. If you've ever been in a group of people and somebody makes a joke, and if everybody looks around at each other to decide whether they're going to laugh, and then one person laughs, and then they kind of confirm that, okay, it's okay to laugh, and then we'll all laugh. You're all helping each other to reach the point where you can agree without causing trouble, without getting in trouble. So groupthink is a way for people to, especially if they're isolated, if you're in a meeting room or if you're off away from a larger group, maybe the manager's not in the room, whatever it is. So the groupthink thinking can influence other members of the group so that everybody reaches the sort of agreement. They're on the same page, I was going to say, until someone can convince them otherwise. And sometimes that's hard to do. So groupthink is a real thing. It's something to be on the lookout for and aware of, especially when what the group is thinking might have some impact on you. That's always you got to keep an eye out for that. And then political compass. Now I've linked to the Wikipedia page on this. It's an actual website. If you read through the Wikipedia page, there are some interesting points made. I've taken, I can't remember if I've taken the political compass quiz or test. I think in there it says 62 questions. I don't remember taking 62 questions recently. I think I may have done this a long time ago. I took a Pew political compass test that was more like 10 or 12 questions. It pretty much indicates that I'm, on average, I'm in the middle of the spectrum, political spectrum, to be clear. So on any given issue, I might be somewhere else. But if you average everything together, which doesn't really make sense, but that's how people treat this data. Personally, I think that's a bad idea. I think it's a bad idea to label people based on particular viewpoints that may or may not agree with other viewpoints so that they become a leftist or a rightist. Like maybe you're in the middle. Maybe you think left sometimes, right sometimes, up, down. Depends on what it is. But we'll touch on this very briefly shortly. So the Political Compass Wikipedia page, which goes into some detail about some of the controversies and disagreements about methodologies and so on the actual website. I will say, though, that multi-dimension analysis of opinions or leanings makes a lot more sense than left and right, or left or right. Even 2 dimensions, left, right, up, down, as you will see if you look into the Political Compass. That might not be enough, but think about it. On with the show, One Crowd or Many. This little mini-series, the one that you're listening to right now, started off with Crowd Wisdom Part 1. And in a fairly short time, we have countless examples in the world, which I will not go into in great detail, or in most cases, any detail, where extracting wisdom from a crowd in these modern times requires a certain amount of consideration. Social media, political identity, personal ideologies, and who knows about more specific influences and group forming sinks. Sinks are things that attract, like your kitchen sink attracts water and crumbs and dirty dishes. So everything lands in a sink. So groups can tend to draw in like-minded individuals whether they are completely like-minded or not, and then we'll see what happens, right? So group forming syncs that lead to the formation of smaller crowds or factions that we should at least be cognizant of. Websites like the Political Compass, as described in the Wikipedia article, rather than via a direct link, is accused of oversimplifying individuals and perhaps presenting erroneous or misleading information in their quiz. I call it a quiz. 62 questions, I think it is. You can read about that in the Wikipedia article, and you don't have to actually visit the website. So the quiz to place someone on their compass. The general notion that reducing an issue down to left side and right side is interesting and worth considering, I think. There is at least one other dimension, possibly more. So they offer 2 dimensions, left and right, like I said, and up, down, around issues and actions. So there's more than 2 ways. Perhaps groupthink is another dimensional reduction that can oversimplify. So when you reduce dimensions, for example, we only have 3 dimensions to play with. So if you want to visualize a 4-dimensional object, you have to reduce its dimensionality to 3 dimensions. Probably more obvious would be if you take a 3-dimensional image, say you have a cube, everybody's drawn the cube, the 2 squares, then you connect the vertices, the corners. So if you draw 2 squares on a piece of paper and you add the little diagonal lines there, you will end up with something that looks like a representation of a 3-dimensional cube dimensionally reduced to 2 dimensions to be drawn or rendered on a piece of paper, which is flat. Technically it has 3 dimensions, but the 3rd dimension is not useful in that case. So if you reduce the dimensionality, you basically say, well, let's take a lot of information and try to represent it in as few degrees of freedom as possible. So we'll group everybody into, well, you're either on the left or on the right. Like, well, what if I'm kind of on the left? Well, then you're just a centrist or you're a moderate, or so they try to simplify it down to the 1 dimension. The Political Compass has 2 dimensions. It's arguable that every person probably could have their own 3 or 4 or 25 dimensional space to try to represent many opinions and whatnot. So maybe placing people in bins like that, and again, groupthink might be just a different version of this. Like, we all agree, right? We're all right here on this one point. There's no latitude or longitude for disagreement or different opinions. So it can be tricky when we start putting people in bins. That's what you call for statistics or for population analysis. They're bin. Any population of anything could be products or people or anything. So when you bin things, you say, okay, this one is similar to the things in that bin. And so you can visualize it as, putting things in big plastic bins. But from an analysis point of view, you're grouping things. You're saying, okay, these 100 things, let's make 10 bins, and we'll put a few in this bin and a few in that bin. And you'll probably find that most of the bins kind of in the middle, depending on how you've ordered them. Most bins, most of the items will end up in the bins kind of in the middle, because they're kind of some of the left and some of the right, or some of the top and some of the bottom, or whatever. Some of them are 0, some of them are 100, but some of them will end up right in the 40 to 60 range, right? Whatever it is. So when we oversimplify, we just say, let's do 2 bins. What if humans are actually like 1 million bins? But we say, no, we just want to know, are they in or they out? Are they left or they right? Are they red or they blue? Etc. So we can oversimplify, which can be tricky. So let's think about crowd wisdom for a second. Recall that what we are considering, and something I will wrap up in part 2 of crowd wisdom when we get there, is how we might consult a large group of people to get a reading of some sort to determine a general popularity, utility, quality, or some other subjective attribute of a physical thing, a creative work, or a policy, or whatever the thing might be. So you should figure, I'll end up with some sort of a range of responses or grades or stars or whatever you're measuring. And we'll figure out from there, like, some sort of a value will emerge, or some assessment. And it's usually going to be based on opinion or an individual measurement that might vary wildly, right? When you're looking at things like flavor, or did it work? How long did it last? Did it break initially? Did it last for 25 years? A lot of that will depend on how people are using things, or what they think of them, or what their previous experiences are. So there's a whole lot that goes into a response when you look at a crowd and get their subjective opinion. Now, objective measurements, you might ask 1 million people how long their 12-inch ruler is, and they might come back with responses that are not 12 inches. It might be some variation on a theme, but objective measurements are a little bit hopefully subject to less error. If there's error in objective measurements, that might be cause for concern or additional investigation. On the other hand, objective measurements like how tall are you, you're going to get a range. So in that case, you can pretty much assume, hopefully they got their ruler sorted out. How tall are you? Well, I'm 5'7", I'm 5'5", I'm 4'10", I'm 6'8", whatever it is. So those are hopefully objective measurements. Those you can treat a little bit more sort of, you can treat them as real data and hope that there's some error bars, but that the people are being reasonably honest. And there are some things about which people are not reasonably honest, and those will show up also in your data. But objective measurements and objective assessments can be handled a little bit differently. But subjective, like what is your opinion, that's a whole ball of wax. So the theory is if we have a large enough crowd with a diverse enough set of opinions, experiences or both, we should be able to get some sense of what the thing might actually be if we can derive some sort of a rating from this crowd signaling. So some range of like, I agree, I disagree, partially, I sort of, I don't, I kind of don't. Somewhere in there you're going to find some amount of truth. And you'll often see reported from polling, you'll see 87% were in these two groups, which can be a little bit disconcerting because you're like, well, is it 10% were definitely no and 77% were kind of no, or was it the other way around? So lumping things together can introduce a further dimensional reduction similar to dimensional reduction. So you're kind of oversimplifying some nuance when you see people grouping population bins together like that. But if you can assess the data yourself, you might end up with a better conclusion if you know what you're looking for. If you look at star ratings on Amazon, for example, this might be useful with a large collection of review submissions. So something with 10 reviews versus 25,000, kind of interesting. Amazon has been experimenting. I think probably they're into we're pretty sure this sort of works stage with AI-generated summaries and specific call-outs for particular attribute mentions and so on. So, what people are saying about this product, they tend to like it, they think it works great, and then they'll put items that have been called out like quality, build quality, energy efficiency, flavor, things like this. So they'll call out specific sort of keyword terms or notions that are either more positive explicitly or more negative explicitly. So, and here again, you can take from these what you will, because the star rating they'll give you is some final value, and then they'll tell you the distribution of 1 to 5 stars. They do enable half stars, but where does that half star end up? If somebody gives it 4.5 stars, is it counted as 4 stars or 5 stars or half of each? What does it do? So in that star rating, is it an average? So if there's 10,000 reviews and it's like, mostly 4 stars, like 90% 4 stars, and a lot of, but obviously not 90%, like 8% 5 stars, and then some minuscule percentage, like 1 or 2 for 3, 4, and 5 stars. No, got that backwards. So it's a good product, 90% 4 stars, like 8% 5 stars, and then so that leaves us 2%. So like then you'll see 1, 1, and 1 for 3, 2, and 1, and you're like, well, where did that extra star come from? Percentage. If you've heard this, any of my audio programs before, you know that when I start doing math, I really got to write it down because I'm like not in the headspace of doing math necessarily. Anyway, so you get the idea, right? You're going to see these bars and the numbers, and you're like, oh, okay, 10,000 reviews and it's 4 stars. That's got to be good, right? So in general, though, when you see a star rating, you have to wonder, is that the average? Is it like 10,000 people gave it 5 stars and 5,000 people gave it 5 stars, 5,000 people gave it 1 star. So does that put you at 3 stars as the average, right? Or are they giving you the median, like the middle of all? So of the 10,000, 3 stars is in the middle, based on the total submissions, right? So it's not an average, it's something literally in the middle. Or is it the mode, which is the one that occurred most often? So with 90% 4-star ratings of the example I gave, that's going to be the mode is 4 stars, right? So what exactly are they doing when they simplify things down to 1 star? Because an average can be very different. And again, if it's half 5 stars and half 1 stars, the average or the median, the mean, I said average, but mean, average, same thing. The mean, median, mode, look those up. The mean or average would be 3 stars if it's balanced exactly between 5 stars and 1 stars. But what does that tell you? Because no one gave a 5-star review. So the median value would have to be like somewhere between the total submissions. So everything's 5 stars and 1 stars. I don't even know what median would mean in that case. It's not really useful to have a median because of that disparity. And the mode, if they're exactly split between them, also not really useful. So you kind of have to look at the data, right? 5 stars, 1 star. Why is half of your crowd so far on one side and so far on the other? It could be something very simple, or it could be something really subtle, right? So it's really useful, and it's always a good idea to understand the origin story or the methodology used to give you some sort of crowd wisdom. I don't think most people do, though. They'll look at their Yelp review and say, oh, 5 stars. Submitted by two reviewers, and they're both the same person, right? So knowing the distribution of the review submissions or the crowd wisdom you're trying to look at and evaluate is useful, and in some cases essential. The effect of factions. Sports and politics, very popular topics in good and bad ways of late here in the U.S. For as long as I can remember, team loyalty and inter-team rivalries between teams on the playing field. Who types this stuff? Jeez. It's probably me. Between fans, wherever they might be. Could be in a pub, could be at home on the couch, could be anywhere. You are one of us, or one of them. This can be fun and good-natured, or maybe not. Factions within fandom, or within a so-called base. You'll see that, or hear that a lot in politics, the political base. Can form. Factions within fandom or within a so-called base can form that will take more extreme positions. See, it makes sense if you don't stop and interrupt yourself. So it might be something innocuous, like attending a sporting event with the team colors painted on the face, waving banners, bringing fandom supplies, right? Some stuff to get noticed, to get on TV. Maybe you're wearing the team uniform or the team colors, and so on. So those are factions because, some fans are there for the game or to watch an event of some sort. Some fans are, and this might be a musical performance or anything. Some people are just there to enjoy the show. Some people come dressed as or there to promote or to demonstrate their loyalty or their fandom in general. And then more extreme, in good or bad ways, more extreme faction members in bad ways might not be so good-natured, and there may be some name-calling or worse beyond a friendly banter mode. Mode, in this case, not the same as mean, median mode. So if people arrive and they're mostly good-natured, but then you have a few people in this one faction that they're dressed and they're painted and they're flag waving and they're excited, but they're also like, we'll start a fight with them. We're here to break windows or cause a ruckus or worse, right? You never know until you find out. We have all, by now, seen at least one news report of post-game violence, including acts against people, or perhaps large-scale vandalism, or both, setting a town on fire, etc., flipping over cars, breaking windows, sometimes by the winning team faction, members of the faction who celebrate with actual violence. I never really understood that. We won, let's break some windows. The losing team might do something similar. There, at least you can say, well, that's stupid, but at least you're angry that you lost, but really you didn't lose. The people on the field or during, playing the game, they lost, they still get paid. So really, what's the problem? In the meantime, many, perhaps most fans on either side of a particular win or loss accept the outcome and they move on. Like, oh, that was a good game. That was an unfair game. I wish my team would have won. And they kind of leave it there. That's probably the majority on either side. If the fans of either team, for the most part, are there to watch a game or a performance or maybe a little bit of both. So feeding the fire is the problem. One problem. We talked about social media chaos 2 episodes back. And last week's episode, we went through perhaps getting back to self-publishing and owning one's opinions and creative work and even audience. So rather than becoming a part of a platform like YouTube or X or Blue Sky or TikTok or whatever, you own your own presence online and you can communicate with people directly. They can follow you or support you or participate in whatever ways that are enabled. The choices are more yours. And especially lately, a representation of what team you're on comes from which platforms you're using. Oh, you're on Twitter/X, you must be this. If you're on Blue Sky, you must be that, etc. Right? That's probably the most obvious one lately. Anyone publishing their work on any social media platform with a goal to monetize their work with an audience and advertisers benefits financially by maintaining that audience and getting views. The more extreme the view, the more agitated the audience, the more likely the audience is to consume the content, so watch your videos, etc., which is monetized, and the loop continues. The casual observer, especially one consuming these forms of content, I watch YouTube videos quite often to see kind of what's going on with the world. I have a probably center-left lean on the creators that I watch, though I watch some people on the right to get a balanced view. So sometimes I venture off into the more extreme versions of right-leaning and left. But I've kind of established a collection of people that I think are reasonable and good faith presenters. And that list changes from time to time. But we're generally going to be consuming from some various platforms, content creators, leaning one way or the other. We tend to gravitate for the normal person. It's normal to gravitate toward like-minded people, a little confirmation bias and so on. So we'll see there is often a rush to produce, on the part of the content creators, produce and publish content on a trending topic to ride that wave of interest. Trending topics. Oh, I better use that hashtag, or I better talk about this topic because it's on people's minds today. So to speak, riding the wave. And what we end up seeing, quite obviously, is surface level opinion representation and presentation, sometimes as though opinions are researched and confirmable facts. So your favorite YouTuber might, I had to make a video. They'll literally say that. Not, I did my research, I interviewed some people, I got some facts, I'm here to do some reporting. That's what professional journalism purveyors and reporters and anyone that has a reporting and confirmation research infrastructure, right? No, I have an opinion. I saw some other YouTubers talking about something. I saw a headline on a cable news channel, etc. I had to make a video. I had to make a TikTok real quick. And so rather than being researched and confirmable and cross-checked and so on, there's no vetting, there's no cross-referencing, cross-checking, cross-referencing, or even second source confirmation. You don't need all those things. YouTubers publish ASAP, whether reporting on a topic is complete or not, because riding that wave is critical to their bottom line. So the topic reporting may be absolutely changing minute by minute because facts are becoming, and some people will load this up with like, oh, look, they're changing the story. No, because people that started reporting on it early, responsible journalism outlets will say, well, we reported this earlier, but now we have additional information or a new report, a new study, a new finding, some new evidence, a new element was discovered in the last 10 minutes. It's a fluid story. As I'm speaking today, there was a plane crash in the Washington, D.C. area. Very unfortunate, obviously. We don't really get plane crashes too often, so there can be a rush to point fingers, the cause of the accident, and in fact, we have an entire thing called the National Transportation Safety Board, which will investigate a plane crash. That is exactly why they exist. And from all of the reading I've done over the years, because I've touched on this several times, and not in this program, not in this series, not in most of my podcasting adventures, but generally speaking, I've found it interesting in how failure analysis occurs. I've read some really interesting books on the topic. So the process of determining causality, what caused this accident, what caused this collision in this case between an aircraft and a helicopter, which led to the deaths of 67 people, which is extremely unfortunate and important to evaluate and reach some sort of a causal conclusion so that it doesn't happen again. But what happens instead, immediately, finger pointing, well, in today's climate, finger pointing, how many YouTube videos get created instantly? Oh, I better spin up a video based on a Fox News report or an MSNBC News report or an AP Wire or some other YouTuber. And so now you're just creating content for the sake of being in that wave. And now people are hearing one version of a story or the early version. Oh, now they're changing their story. Well, because you only heard one YouTuber's take on one news report, not the full scope and grandeur of the reporting of a very, very dynamic story. And so this can apply to just about anything. It becomes very common in the new media era. So you kind of have to be careful. I'm not anti, but I am more and more aware that what you are hearing your favorite YouTuber tell you is probably just what they heard a few minutes before from pick an outlet, probably their favorite news channel or their favorite other YouTuber or maybe a newspaper or a website or who knows. So being aware of the ingredients in the thing you're about to consume is probably a good idea. So then we end up with bifurcation. That is grossly dividing things into two by frication, by two pieces, splitting into two. Frication, I don't know if that means splitting, but you fork in the road, however you want to divide two sides of a coin. If an issue is an active news item or controversial or generally divisive, we're likely to see a group of eager influencers publishing their opinion to their audiences on what we can simplify as either side. Simplify. So we'll simplify it as either side. So we'll say there's two sides. There could be more. Again, dimensional reduction. So as a particular story develops, so you're basically preaching to your audience with the facts that you're just hearing 2 minutes before. So as facts become available, as resolutions become apparent, whatever the case, I was almost going to say cause, but no, case, the more responsible influencers will publish updates. Will the previous reporting, and I'll put that in quotes if you like, reporting, retelling of stories just heard, will those in need of correction or outright removal actually stay? Will they just remain as is? Probably. There are still views to monetize after all. So some people, including the algorithm, will watch the first version, get the views, and if they don't know that there's an update, they might figure, okay, well now I know what my favorite YouTuber said, so that's what I'm going with. But if you're not keeping track, if you don't spend your life watching YouTube videos and keeping track of updates and changes to facts and cross-checking and cross-referencing, fact-checking for yourself, who knows which version of a rapidly changing narrative you're going to get. And then later, you might hear some other, like, oh no, they said it was actually 12. And you're like, oh no, I heard it was 10. Changing the story. As various parts of the population which is consuming these pieces of content consume the current up-to-date version, or maybe the older, out-of-date version, or the entire progression. Maybe they consume both sides, maybe only one side. And again, I'm simplifying to just two sides. Maybe there's 25 sides. We begin to see various biases, especially confirmation bias, but there are others, availability, etc., which the more extreme faction members will jump on first. Some will reshare, publish their own reaction content with selected excerpts, and that's a great way. It's a great way, a little motivated reasoning, like I'm going to prove that this is exactly what we all agree it already is. by only excerpting the parts that make sense in our narrative. That happens all the time. And you have to be aware of it. Otherwise, you may just accept. The divide can grow wider between the two factions. That's bifurcation and action. And you reinforce the differences. And the reinforcement, the bifurcation, could very well be the result of surface level, very shallow analysis, motivated reasoning, call to confirmation bias or availability heuristics. Oh, you know what you've been hearing the whole time. You're not going to step out of your comfort zone, and so you're just going to go with what's around you. The availability here, like, I know these things because I've seen them myself, or my friend told me, and I have these notions, and you're going to confirm them, so I don't have to think about it. You're just going to tell me I'm right, and I'm going to continue to believe this narrative, when in fact, as a story is developing, or as new information is emerging, or if there's unbiased or at least balanced analysis, no dimensional reduction, there may be a lot more going on, but some people may never hear or want to hear or learn these other things. So it keeps it simple. So uninformed crowd wisdom, you have to be aware of that if you're thinking about wisdom of crowds. Once our factions are resharing and amplifying opinion mixed with fact, perhaps with clarity developing as more is known for real-time events unfolding, for example, we see narratives reinforced, fingers pointed, adversarial positions bolstered. So even if facts to the contrary come out, we won't talk about those, or we'll couch them as reinforcement of the fake news premise, or the story is changing premise. I think it's from 1984, the famous book. The price of chocolate was raised last week, so that this week they can say the price of chocolate has been reduced again, and everybody can cheer. So you just keep raising the price, but keep that quiet, and then talk about the price cuts. I think I'm remembering that correctly. Either way, it depends on what the crowd wants and what you can give them to make them more eager to be in that crowd. If the larger crowd is relying more and more on social media, influencer and re-influencer, that is people that do reaction videos and cut videos up into dimensionally reduced consideration. So re-influencer reporting in quotes again, on what their like-minded friends and allies are telling or showing them without seeking their own primary sources, verified reporting, facts, and so on, we may end up with a crowd that is informed by opinion, hearsay, and an agenda rather than reality-based conclusions. Tell me if that sounds familiar. At this point, it is entirely possible that the crowd or multiple crowd factions are arguing over misinformation, pointing fingers at the wrong people for the wrong reasons, and re-entrenching themselves with their fellow faction members, telling the rest of their side of an issue or person or situation to move in a more extreme direction that we cannot believe them. So your crowd bifurcated, now arguing over misconceptions, misinformation, disinformation, or an agenda that may not even be based in reality. And I'm cherry picking sort of the worst cases, right? But I'm sure you can find the worst cases. We've all come across things that people can just spin up and create, and there is a certain freedom of speech, which everybody can agree is not something that everybody agrees on. But commercial platforms versus government resources and so on. But generally speaking, people have a wide latitude to express themselves unless they don't, and that is just the first filter that we have to pass through and determine what are we really learning, what are we basing our views, our conceptions on. And if we start adding more filters like left side, right side, extremist view, filtering out opposing opinions, etc., it can only get more tricky. So what is the impact on crowd wisdom in general? Obviously, we're not going to solve that today, but something to think about. In order to derive value from the wisdom of crowds, it is important to have some understanding of the makeup of that crowd. They should be diverse, ideally distributed randomly through a population to be sampled, so that if we choose a random population sample, we get a chaotic distribution of opinions and viewpoints, which is good, rather than a clustered, skewed selection that will bias our outcome. If you were to sample a physical neighborhood and you said, okay, we're only going to ask people on this street what they think of lawn having grass, real grass that they have to water and take care of for their home, and all of the homes on the street have grass, you are selecting a population that has a visible opinion. Now, some of them might say it's a bad idea because I have grass, but you're not asking a random sampling. You're selecting a population that you know some of their possibly preconceived notions, right? They all have grass. They're all going to have a skewed opinion about having grass. So if you just ask a random selection, I don't have grass, I do have grass, I like grass, I don't have grass, I don't like grass, but I do have grass, you're going to get all kinds of variation. And then you'll kind of come up with like the general opinion of a geographical area is. And I will add to that here in the greater Vegas area, there's always a concern about water. So there may be some reflection on, well, I have grass, but I feel like it's a waste of water, right? So you may be asking in a water usage context, right? So there's all kinds of subtlety. And if you limit yourself to only asking people on one street that own homes with or have homes, live in homes that have grass, they might have a particularly skewed set of opinions. And so you have to be aware of your population and whether it's randomly distributed or something close, or if you are, if you only ask people that vote a certain way or that have a particular opinion or drive a certain kind of vehicle or whatever it is, you are selecting your population rather than doing a random sampling, and that will affect your outcomes. Maybe you want to do a non-random selection. Depends. So yeah, if you have a cluster or a non-random selection, you have to be aware of that. And again, you might want to do that. Totally depends. Depends on what you're trying to derive from your survey of your crowd. What kind of wisdom are you looking for? So even with our Amazon ratings and reviews example, we are getting a population that shops on or through Amazon, who take the time to post a review, who may or may not be receiving incentives to submit a review that might be more positive or more negative than they might otherwise have been. I did not take like cash incentives, but there was one company that would say, hey, can we send you a frother or a knife sharpener? I think there were, and like a spice grinder. So 3 different things. They said, if we send you one of these, can you write a review? Now, they never said, please write us a 5-star review or anything. And I would just disclose in my review that I was sent a review unit and I used it, and here's my honest opinion. And as it happens, 2 of the items I found to be really good. I gave them 5 stars because they were really good. I really did use them. I really got value. They were reasonably priced. So yeah, why not? What's not to like? But I did disclose I received these for free. The 3rd item I thought was garbage. And I said as much. And that was it. And they did even want to send me more items, but I said, I don't have time for this. But so they weren't particularly upset, or they didn't give me any opinion or viewpoint, or they didn't try to change my mind on the garbage item. But I disclosed that. Not everybody does. And then, of course, I didn't even buy the items on Amazon. So was I shopping for these items? Was I comparatively shopping, or did I just receive them? Because of all of the items I considered, none. The one I received for free was good, right? So there's already some bias in there, and people have to understand that. But that doesn't get shown in the star rating averages or medians or modes or whatever they're showing. So who knows? Who knows? All the people who bought the item at Target or Walmart or somewhere else probably didn't review it on Amazon. They might review it on the Target or Walmart or other websites. So the information is spread out, and the population sample is self-selected, and it's probably biased in some way. And you have to kind of feel your way through that if you're going to base a purchase decision or something similar on these reviews. So and of course these companies know that. As our crowd or crowds become more and more polarized, more adversarial, even more ideological, but also possibly less informed, there's the illusion of being informed, because I always refer to the Paul Reiser bit, and I have it somewhere. It's a horrible VHS tape scanned and posted on YouTube. So horrible. But the bit is essentially, there's somebody, he said, the Paul Reiser comedian says, have you ever walked up to a line and the person, you say, is this is this the line for this movie, for example, so I can get tickets? And the person ahead of you is like, yeah. And you're like, that person's only 30 seconds smarter than I am. How do they know? So you say, are you sure? And you say, yeah, the guy told me. The guy? Who's the guy? They told me that the guy is... So you basically separate yourself from authority, and you just assume that what you've been told is correct without actually being able to verify it or even wanting to verify it. So you just assume the guy was correct, or the person in front of you must know because they were here first. They were here before you. So there's a certain amount of credibility that we're assigning to these ratings that we see on Amazon and elsewhere. And we can see the same thing in polling results. And I've already talked about this previously in a previous episode specifically about polling. But if we're looking at the wisdom of crowds, it could be something even less scientific than polling, but more consequential. Like a lot of people are saying, what does that even mean? Everybody in my neighborhood thinks this one thing. Well, but are they all skewed in one direction? Is that really meaningful, or are they being biased in one way or the other? So the wisdom of the crowd can vary wildly, and the sampling of the crowd from which this wisdom will be derived has huge consequences in what sort of wisdom you actually perceive. So choosing an item to purchase on Amazon based on star ratings versus selecting policy and actions at nation scale are probably two ends of a spectrum. And are they being treated differently? The best case here is to be aware and hope for the best, because sometimes they're not being treated differently. You know, hey, that policy from some political leader or some government official, I'll give it 5 stars. Did you read it, or do you understand it? No, but I saw somebody on YouTube said it was 5 stars, so good enough for me. And so we have to question the wisdom that we are deriving. And so if there's one thing we can take, and this has been a monologue, of course, so my audio essay, if I've described what doesn't work, what does work is actually listening to people and considering the distribution of the, I'm not going to say the distribution of opinions, but the distribution of submission. That is to say, my population sample has to be diverse enough so that the opinions I'm going to get are diverse. You can't look at the opinions and say, oh, we need more diverse opinions. You have to start with people geographically, or depending on what you're trying to determine, geographically or similarly diverse to start with. Because if you say, well, we got too many opinions of this in that direction, how do you know that you got too many? Well, our population was skewed. Okay, well, that's something to consider, but you kind of blew it by not making sure your population was not skewed. So a large enough population, statistically significant population size, a distribution that makes sense. And if you take a statistics course, you'll learn all about distributions and chi-squared tests and standard deviations and all these good things that try to help you determine if what you have is good data on which to draw any conclusions. And most people don't do that. So the wisdom of crowds at that point becomes a question of which YouTube channel you're watching most frequently, or which TikToker you choose to believe. And these may be troubling, but this is where there is a lot of room for improvement. It's not going to happen at the end of this episode, but ideally we can, the thing that we can do about the parts that don't work is to try to at least make it clear to people when what they are consuming is based on reality or perception. And that in itself is a nearly impossible task. And it's something that would take up as much, if not more time in general than trying to convince someone in a specific instance that the facts as they've been told are wrong. It's a big challenge. Making bad decisions on bad information has consequences, and sometimes they affect the people around you, and that is bad. That's where I'm going to leave it for today. Another in the little mini-series on crowd wisdom. Part 2 will come up soon. There may be another week. I have a couple of ideas, or maybe we can wrap it up and we'll hope for some conversation. You can't just listen to me. What I have to say about everything, even though it is correct, is worth debating. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we'll catch you on the flip-flop. Bye-bye.